දසන කාන්ති චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වළකයි.
The 51st session of the United Nations Human Rights Council began this morning in Geneva in Switzerland under the patronage of President of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Federico Villegas. With the commencement of the session, a minute of silence was observed over the demise of late Queen Elizabeth II. This afternoon, the interactive dialogue on the report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights commenced after the report was tabled by UN Acting High Commissioner for Human Rights Nada Al-Nashif.
We welcome the government's commitment to provide social protection for the most vulnerable and encourage member states and international financial institutions to ensure that Sri Lanka has fiscal space to fulfill its core economic and social rights obligations in this regard. I encourage the new government to embark on a national dialogue to advance human rights and reconciliation and to carry out the deeper institutional, democratic and security sector reforms needed to restore the independence of key institutions, to combat impunity, to prevent the recurrence of human rights violations and to tackle the economic crisis. In doing so, it is essential that the government ensures an environment that respects and promotes free expression, peaceful assembly and inclusive democratic participation. Of concern in recent weeks, scores of leaders and members of the protest movement and trade unions have been arrested. Particularly troubling was the use of the Prevention of Terrorism Act to arrest 3 student leaders on 18 August, despite the government's announcement in June 2022 that it has been applying the de facto moratorium on the use of this act since March of this year. I urge the government not to revert to this reliance on draconian security laws, but to take positive action to foster an environment for peaceful protest, critical discussion and debate. The government has a fresh opportunity to steer the country on the path towards justice and reconciliation and to address the legacy of conflict. I was pleased to discuss with the government potential areas of cooperation, including the drafting of a new counter-terrorism law to replace the PTA and in the area of transitional justice and the strengthening of institutions. It is the hope of this office that the government will now seize the opportunity offered by the changed circumstances in the country to re-embark on these fundamental processes that promote national reconciliation by ensuring accountability for past human rights violations and abuses.
Following the statement on the UN Acting High Commissioner for Human Rights, Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri delivered Sri Lanka's statement to the chamber.
The recent changes that have taken place bear testimony to our continued commitment to upholding our long-standing democratic principles and norms. The constitutional right to peacefully assembly and expression guaranteed the democratic space for our people to exercise their right. In this regard, transgressions of the law resulting in criminal and unlawful activity were addressed in accord with the law and the Constitution. The proposed 22nd Amendments to the Constitution introduces several salient changes which would strengthen the democratic governance and independent oversight of key institutions and combat corruption, including through the constitutional recognition of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. The recommendation of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry have resulted in progressive amendment to the Prevention of Terrorism Act and the release of the detainees. Further recommendations are awaited. As we delivered on the onerous task of review and reform of the PTA this year, to further enhance human rights, we will replace the PTA with a more comprehensive national security legislation in accordance with the international best practices. The recent delisting of groups and individuals will provide further impetus for the constructive dialogue. While our immediate concern is economic recovery, advancing human rights of our people is of equal priority. We look to the genuine support and understanding of this Council as we proceed on this path.